Yeah, he helps like train dogs for the CNI, and his roommate is like he's gonna have his puppy for a year, like pretty good, but it's still like a teeny tiny. Guy works at a pharmacy, so he can't really work with him, but Jeffrey can. So Jeffrey's been taking care of it during the day, and then taking care of it at night. But it's
I'm very jealous of everyone that you want to do.
Okay, let's see if this is working okay. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Welcome to the first Queer Politics webinar, which is a new enterprise. I'm hoping, and perhaps Gabe will let me know that I'm appearing and you're hearing me.
Yes, we can see the rainbow flag.
Good. Well, at least that's you and I here. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that everybody is doing well in these difficult and strange times. And I hope that everybody's loved ones are enduring. And we hope that this is a way of connecting lots of people. We have a couple of hundred people registered now for the series. At any given time, maybe we'll get between 50 and 100 people as part of these seminars. And what we hope this is quite a democratizing enterprise where we can have some of our friends and colleagues from around the world. We've already got registrants from parts of the world where LGBTQ scholarship is far less developed. And that's an exciting thing, to be able to talk to lots of people and hear from lots of people, not just in the United States, but globally as well. Gabe and I decided to treat ourselves as guinea pigs today and go first. So if there were massive logistical failures, we would take those and try and sort them out before anything else went wrong for other speakers. But as you've seen from the lineup, we have a really exciting raft of speakers. Some of the speakers are on with us today, and they address a huge variety of topics within the queer politics world. I should also say that I think it's important at this time that a lot of us and scholars and graduate students around the world may not necessarily be as in fortunate positions that someone like myself is in, where through a lot of luck and being in the right place at the right time, I have a stable job and a lot of access to resources. And I think it's important as we build a community of scholars studying these crucial issues that people like I and others are resources to you. So if there's anything we can do to assist you, to help you during these times as scholars, as those activists and advocates as well, please reach out to me. Please reach out to others that you know. And I'm very excited to be part of that building a cohort enterprise. So what we're going to do is for about 25 minutes, we are going to have a presentation from Gabriele Magni, my co-author, and the best part of the team of he and I, on our recent polling work about the role of identity within Pete Buttigieg's run for public office. And we were particularly interested to see whether varying the salience of his different identities would affect the way people, the propensity of people to vote for him. And we were really interested to see whether that varied by subgroups. And Gabrielle's going to take you through that. We'll do about 25 minutes of presentation, and then we will take about half an hour of questions. I will be keeping a list of questioners and try and include as many as we can. So either send me a private chat message and I can put you on the list, or send me, or put your hand up as well in this Zoom format, and I will put you on the list to ask a question. When it's time for your question, I'll send you a private message just to warn you that you're next, and you should be ready to unmute your audio and release your video if you so wish. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and allow Gabrielle to talk us through the paper that is in progress about Pete Buttigieg and his identity, his sexual orientation, and how that played during the primary campaign in February, March of this year. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'm excited to be here and present, and it's very nice to meet you everyone online. I'm going to share my screen, and I would like just to remind everyone to please mute yourself if you're not asking questions, because there is some background noise, so that would be helpful. Okay, so Andy has already introduced, this is work that is in progress that we started this spring, and we are focusing on Pete Buttigieg, and we were really interested in the question, was Pete Buttigieg electable? Is America ready for a gay president? As you all remember, Pete Buttigieg has been the most successful openly gay man running for president in the US. He did very well in the first two competitions, either win or got very close to win Iowa and New Hampshire within the Democratic primary. He is the first openly gay man who will have delegates at the presidential convention. And so he's done very well, beyond expectation, but we also should keep in mind that when Pete Buttigieg was running, many doubts were raised about the possibility for a openly gay man to be competitive in election. And these doubts did not come only from Republicans, from conservative commentators. They also came from Democratic voters. Some of the Democratic voters were quite uncomfortable with Pete being openly gay. And they even came from within the campaign. Pete's campaign worried about how an openly gay man would do in the South, and specifically among Black voters in South Carolina. And indeed, work that Andy and I have done previously, which is now conditionally accepted at the Journal of Politics, finds that when American voters are presented with hypothetical candidates, an hypothetical gay candidate on average does 7 percentage points worse than a straight candidate who is otherwise exactly the same. So we find that there is still a penalty for gay candidate when we are talking in a way that is not so concrete. And we find that two reasons drive voter bias and hostility towards gay candidates. One is plain prejudice and discrimination, and the other one is electability concern. So worries about whether the country is ready to embrace an openly gay man, in this case, running for office. And yet Pete Buttigieg was not an hypothetical gay candidate. He was a man with a history and a man with several characteristics that voters have traditionally considered assets in a presidential run. If we take a look at this survey, which is from a few years ago, 2016, we can see that Pete Buttigieg checks all of the boxes that voters consider as advantages for candidates running for president. Pete Buttigieg was a veteran. He spent some time in Afghanistan. Pete Buttigieg attended Harvard, and he always talked openly about his religiosity, how he attends church on Sunday, how he went to Catholic school. So we have on the one hand, the first openly gay man running for president. On the other hand, we have someone who is a veteran, have elite education, is openly religious. And so how does all of this combination of different identities how does it play out in the electorate? So the question that we explore with this work is, first of all, was Pete Buttigieg electable? And what happens when we vary the identity, the salience of different identities of Pete Buttigieg when we introduce the candidate to voters? Do voters become less likely to support him when we describe him as openly gay? And then what happens when we emphasize other characteristics of Pete Buttigieg, such as his military service, his religiosity? Are these characteristics powerful enough to offset any potential negative impact that comes from Pete Buttigieg being openly gay? So these are the questions that we try to answer with our study. How did we do that? A couple of months ago, in February and March, we conducted a very large survey with American voters, more than 6,000 likely American voters, and we fielded the survey in 12 states. We focused on 8 battleground states, because these are the crucial states that are going to determine the election in November, and you can see the states on the map. And then we added 2 liberal states, California and New York, and 2 conservative states, Texas and Indiana, the home state of Pete Buttigieg. Our sample closely mirrors registered voter in the US in terms not only of gender and race and age, but also in terms of income and education. What we were really interested was to explore whether voters would pick Pete Buttigieg if Pete Buttigieg were to become the Democratic nominee or Donald Trump as the Republican nominee. So what we did, we presented voters with information about Donald Trump and information about Pete Buttigieg before asking who they would vote for. We presented every voter with the same information about Donald Trump, and we presented voters with different information about Pete Buttigieg. Specifically, we had 7 treatments, so we randomly assign our survey respondents to one of these 7 treatments so that we have 7 groups in our surveys, and each group saw different information about Mayor Pete. Here you can see a list of our treatment, and I'm gonna go into detail in a minute about how this information changed. I'm gonna show on the screen what our survey respondents, likely voters, saw before making their vote decision. But before that, I just want to show the information that we presented about Donald Trump. And I also want to point out that these words, these pictures, they come from campaign material of the candidates. So we try to build a survey experiment, a framing experiment that would be as realistic as possible. So here you can see we have a picture of Donald Trump. We say he's the president of the United States. We say where he went to school, that he had a business career, that he won the November 2016 election. He's running again to make America great again. So this is basic information as Donald Trump, for Donald Trump as the Republican candidate. And each survey respondent saw this information. And then survey respondent saw information about Pete Buttigieg. This is our baseline condition. We call it Mayor Pete treatment. We introduce Mayor Pete as a mayor who comes from South Bend, Indiana, so he's from the Midwest. We provide some information about what he did. He turned around his own city, South Bend, during times of economic crisis. We present him as someone who can bring change to Washington, D.C., someone who can rally Americans together. And again, this comes from campaign material. And then you can see there is a picture of Pete Buttigieg in order to offer a face to our likely voters. So this is the baseline condition. This is the second treatment, what we call the gay Pete treatment. The yellow highlights on these slides indicate the differences between the baseline condition and this treatment. When we presented the slides to survey respondents, there was no yellow highlight, but for the sake of this presentation, this is a way to make clear what changes between treatments and control. And here we say that Pete is the first openly gay candidate who is running for president. And in addition to what we described before, we now say that he's married, he has a husband, he lives in South Bend with his husband. And then we repeat in the last paragraph that he's a gay man. The third treatment is what we call proudly gay Pete. As you can see here, the biggest difference is the picture. Pete Buttigieg here is on stage with his husband, they are embracing each other. And in the description that we provide, we say that he is not only the first openly gay candidate for president, but is also a proud gay man, someone who is not afraid of showing his love for his husband. So we want to see if the way in which a gay candidate is presented and the fact that here is presented with a same-sex partner has an impact on voter attitudes and their support for the candidate. Then this was the military Pete treatment. As you can see, there is a picture of Pete in uniform. Here is in Afghanistan. We introduce him not only as a mayor from the Midwest, but here he's also a veteran. He's someone who spent 7 months in Afghanistan in the Navy. And again, in the last paragraph, we repeat once again that he's a veteran. And then this is the treatment that we call military and proudly gay. Here we combine the previous two treatments that I just showed, the military Pete treatment and the proudly gay Pete treatment. And so here we have the two pictures combined, Pete in Afghanistan and Pete with his husband. And we have all of the sentences that we had from the previous treatment. So we say that he was in Afghanistan in the Navy for 7 months, but we also say that he's married to a man, and is not afraid of showing his love. What we wanted to do with this treatment, we wanted to see whether presenting an additional layer of identity, that is to say, military Pete, whether that can offset any negative potential impact that the proudly gay Pete could generate among some voters. The sixth treatment was religious Pete. As we know, Pete's religiosity was an important point of discussion during his campaign. And so here we say that he's a Christian, he attended Catholic school, he still goes to church on Sunday, and we see a picture of Pete who is praying. And then the last paragraph, now we say he's a mayor and he's Christian. And then the last treatment that we presented to our respondents is the religious and proudly gay Pete. And so here we combine the two treatments, the religious treatment, so he's a Christian, but he's also proudly gay, he's with his husband, and they are embracing each other on stage. And so we present the two pictures of Pete praying and Pete being with his husband, again, to see how these different layers of identity interact in vote choice. So these are the treatments that we presented, and each respondent then was asked the following question after seeing information about Donald Trump and information about Pete Buttigieg. So we asked them, if the election were today and Donald Trump were the Republican candidate, Pete Buttigieg were the Democratic candidate, who would you vote for? Who would be your choice for president? And respondents could pick Buttigieg, could pick Trump, or they could say that they were undecided. Before looking at the results divided by treatments, I just want to share the overall results in the general sample of 6,000 plus likely voters. We see that Pete Buttigieg is ahead by about 6 percentage points. He wins 46% of the votes in our sample. There is a substantial number of undecided, but he's clearly ahead. And we find that Pete Buttigieg wins not only the liberal states, but he also wins some important swing states and is ahead in all of the swing states, even if in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida is within the margin of error. Perhaps most surprising, is ahead even in his home state of Indiana, even though it's a statistical tie. Buttigieg loses North Carolina and Texas in our survey. What happens though when we look at the results of vote choice between Pete Buttigieg and Donald Trump divided by treatment? Here, before I go into detail, I just wanted to briefly explain what I'm going to focus on these slides and on the next slide. So first of all, we can see the 7 treatment, and we can see within each treatment the proportion of votes for Pete Buttigieg, for Donald Trump, and the proportion of voters who are undecided. At the bottom here, you can see the number of voters in each condition. And then I'm going to focus on 2 outcomes of interest in this and in the following slide. The first one is the margin of victory. So the difference in the proportion of votes between Pete Buttigieg and Donald Trump, and whether this margin of victory is within the margin of errors or not. Just as a visual aid, as you can see, there are some squares that are dark blue. These are cases in which the Democratic candidate, Pete Buttigieg, wins and the victory is outside the margin of error. And then we have the light blue. These are cases in which the Democratic candidate is leading, but the difference is within the margin of error. And then I'm also going to focus on another outcome. The outcome is the proportion of votes for Pete Buttigieg and how this proportion of votes vary depending on the treatment that respondents were presented with, and whether the proportion of votes across treatments are statistically significantly different. So as we can see, when we look at the results by treatment, Pete is ahead in all of the treatments. And yet we see that in 3 of these treatments, the margin of victory is within the margin of error. And specifically, we see that the religious Pete does worse compared to other candidates, and especially compared to other treatments of Pete, especially the religious proudly gay Pete. This proportion of vote, 42.4%, is significantly smaller than the proportion of votes for military Pete and also for the baseline mayor Pete. So just a few considerations about these results, and then obviously in the Q&A, we're happy to answer all of the questions that you may have. We see that the gay Pete is only weakly penalized. It's 1.5 percentage points less than the mayor Pete, but the difference is not statistically significant. We see that when we present Pete on the stage with his husband, well, then the penalty becomes stronger. We take this as some evidence that some of the voters still are uncomfortable with 2 men displaying love or affection in public. Something that is considered normal for a straight candidate probably is not for a gay candidate among some subset of the electorate. And so this is also a testament to the bravery of Pete, who never shied away during the primary from embracing his husband, from bringing his husband on stage. Another interesting point is that if we go back to the previous slide and we look at the military proud gay Pete, it's quite interesting to notice how once we add another layer of identity, and so we present Pete also as a veteran, the negative effect that was introduced by being on stage with his husband, by being proudly gay, goes away. So the veteran status counterbalances any negative impact that was coming from his gay identity. And then, as I mentioned before, and I'm gonna talk about it more later, the version that does worst is the religious Pete version. And this is an interesting finding in the case of Pete, because this campaign emphasized the importance of a moderate religious candidate who could perhaps talk to moderate voters who could reach across the aisle, who could maybe speak to some disaffected conservatives. We don't find a lot of support for religious Pete. Now, looking at how different subgroup of voters react to our different treatments. First of all, if we look at the difference by party ID, we see that there are no statistically significantly different results by treatment among Democrats and among Republicans. Republicans consistently vote for Trump. Pete is never above 10%. Among Republicans, Democrats consistently vote for Pete, regardless of how we present Pete, even if the religious and proudly gay Pete, the last treatment in the Democrats column, is the worst result for Pete. And again, in the interest of time, I'm just going over this. We can go back if you have questions later. We see quite interesting results if we look at independents. We have more than 2,000 independents in our sample. And again, the main takeaway point is that the religious Pete is the Pete that does the worst among independents. If you look at the proportion of votes for Pete, the religious treatments are the only treatments in which Pete is below 40% of the votes. In one of these treatments, he loses to Donald Trump. In the other one, he wins, but it's a statistical tie. And results are very similar if we focus on moderates. Here we measure ideology on a 7-point scale. Moderates are in the middle. And again, we see that the religious Pete is the worst Pete when it comes to electoral results. All of these results, religious Pete and religious proudly gay Pete, the margins of victory are within the margin of error. So why does religious Pete lose? Here we speculate, and we would be interested in learning what you think. One possible explanation is that when Pete is presented as religious and gay, he may come across as inauthentic. There may be too much crossover, and so voters may decide to stick with the religious candidate or conservative candidate, Donald Trump. Another option is that when we talk about religion in the treatments, we make religion salient in the minds of voters. And if religion is salient, then voters may become more likely to embrace the conservative candidate. Again, these are possible explanations, but we would love to hear what you think on this point. Now, taking a look at results by age. If we look at young voters, we see that they go for Pete consistently. There is no significant difference across treatments. It doesn't really matter how we present Pete, even if the military proudly gay Pete does best. When we look at older voters, we see that there is a majority of support for Donald Trump. All of these results are within the margin of error. An interesting point is that gay Pete is the version of the treatment that does best among older voters. And once again, the religious Pete doesn't do very well. Sorry, the proudly gay Pete and the religious and proudly gay Pete, if we look at the older voters, these are the two worst treatment below 40% of the vote. If we look at the results by gender, there is a clear difference between men who consistently support Donald Trump and women who consistently support Pete. All of the results among women are outside the margin of error, even though it's interesting to notice that even among women, military Pete, and especially among women, military Pete is the version that does best. Now, looking at results by race, we present whites and blacks. We can see again a clear pattern. Among whites, Donald Trump always wins, and especially Donald Trump margin of victory is outside the margin of error when we present Pete as proudly gay and when we present Pete as proudly gay and religious. Once again, these are the two worst results for Pete. He stays below 40%. When we look at results among black voters, we see that Pete clearly wins regardless of how we present Pete. Even when Pete is gay, when Pete is proudly gay, he wins among black voters. It's true that when Pete is presented as proudly gay, support is a bit lower than other treatments. Interestingly, what happens among black voters, the number of undecided goes up. So they don't go and vote for Donald Trump. some of them say that they are undecided. A couple of comments about the results based on race. We often hear that Black voters are less likely to support gay candidates. You may remember there was at some point last year a memo from the Pete Buttigieg campaign that was leaked, in which the campaign worried about support for gay men among Black voters in South Carolina. What our results tell us is that Black voters are much more supportive of Pete over Donald Trump than white voters in each treatment, even when Pete is gay, even when Pete is presented as proudly gay. And so the takeaway point from this is that when we are considering general election and the choices between a Republican and a Democratic candidate, Black voters remain the most reliable block of support for Democratic candidates, even when Democratic candidates are gay. So in this case, Party D trumps sexual orientation, and Black voters go for the gay candidate much more than white voters do if the gay candidate is a Democratic one. The last group that we wanted to show is refers to results divided by respondents who say they have LGBTQ friends and respondents who say they do not have LGBTQ friends. As you can see, among people who have LGBTQ friends, Pete Buttigieg wins clearly in every treatment. Results are quite different though if we focus on respondents who do not have LGBTQ friends. In this group, if we focus on the second table, any mention of Pete being gay causes Pete to lose to Donald Trump. And specifically, any mention of Pete on the stage with his husband, with a same-sex partner, causes Pete to lose, and the margin of victory is outside the margin of error. So we see that there is more movement among people who do not have LGBTQ friends. Okay, so just to bring together what we have been discussing, our results suggest that Pete Buttigieg was electable. The first slide, results by treatment, show that Pete was ahead across treatments. We find that he does very well with moderates and he does very well with independents also, and crucially, Pete wins the swing states. On the other hand, I also want to show the results of another question that we had in our survey, which was about a hypothetical gay candidate. So not about Pete Buttigieg, but about a hypothetical gay candidate running for president against Donald Trump. When we ask voters what was the likelihood of a gay Democratic candidate compared to a straight Democratic candidate of beating Donald Trump, we see that the results are quite different. Here you can see the results divided by treatment. We measure the likelihood in the perceptions of voters on a 10-point scale from 1 to 10, and we see that voters consistently believe that a straight Democratic candidate has better chances of beating Donald Trump. All of these differences are statistically significant, and we see that this is true across all treatments. Interestingly, if we focus on the first column of the gay Democratic candidate, introducing Pete as proudly gay increases the concerns about electability over an hypothetical gay Democratic candidate among our survey respondents. And so just to conclude, just to summarize the results, what we see from our evidence is that a gay candidate was electable as president, but the way in which a gay candidate is presented matters, especially for crucial swing blocks, for independent voters, for moderate voters. And contrary to what we read in most of the press, contrary to some of the beliefs in the Pete campaign, Mayor Pete's religiosity was not really an asset for Pete as a candidate. His religiosity became more of a barrier than his sexual orientation. And then, referring to the slide that I just presented, we see that there is a difference in the perceptions of voters. There is enthusiasm for Mayor Pete as a candidate, but then there are doubts about a gay candidate being able to become president in America. And so this is a pernicious prophecy, the self-fulfilling prophecy of unelectability. Some voters may think that a gay candidate doesn't stand a chance, and so they may not choose a gay candidate even if they like the gay candidate because they're worried about other voters' reaction. And so as a result, a gay candidate is less likely to win. I think I'm going to stop here and going back to Andy, so then we can answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabe. That's wonderful. As you can all see, it's much more pleasant having Gabe present things because he has a better accent than mine. But we have a series of people already lined up to ask questions. If you would like to ask a question, please just message me on the chat and I'll add you. We're going to start with Andrew Flores, and then after Andrew is Howard Rosen, then Sam Ritzholtz, and then Jake Reeves and Andrew Proctor. But let's start with Andrew Flores, who will push us on some methodology, I'm sure.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm not going to pick on methodology too much, actually. I was just curious about the sample. If it were, I'm sure it's online, but kind of recruitment strategy, is this a non-probability versus probability sample? That's one question. And the second question, just because I'm curious, is also the external validity of the experiment. Just trying to think, how did, because we know that campaigns micro-target the electorate. And so I'm just curious if you might be able to have evidence that Pete was presented in a variety of ways to particular subsets of the population, and if that might actually help like motivate your analysis or the external validity of your findings, because it's really fascinating, right? But then it's also like, who gets presented with proud gay Pete, right? Or who gets presented with religious Pete? And so it'd be really interesting to think about those things. And maybe just a conversation with the campaign, if they're willing to share some details about that, might be really fascinating.
Well, thank you, Andy, for your question. Andy, let me know if you want to answer any question. About the sample, yes, it was an aligned sample. We work with DINATA, so survey sampling international, it was non-probability. And yeah, we try to match as close as possible the electorate, the registered electorate. And the second point, well, I think it's a terrific idea. I don't know if they're going to be willing to share the data, but that would be definitely very interesting to find out who was shown religious Pete or proudly gay Pete. On the other hand, I think it's also interesting to keep in mind that the campaign doesn't control entirely the narrative. The media picked up a lot about this unelectability or this Pete being religious. So it's true that there are micro-targeting efforts from the campaign, and then beyond that, there are also presentations that are not under the campaign control. But yes, we should definitely reach out and ask them. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, let's move to Howard Rosen.
Hi, Andy. Thanks to you and Gabe. My question is, do the results control for, or is there a way to tease out respondents who hold an anyone but Trump posture? Because it would seem that if you have many of that type of respondent in your sample, then any candidate you would position opposite Trump would have a baseline of voting support.
Thank you, Howard. Well, that's a great question. We don't have a specific question, unfortunately, asking voters whether they would be anyone but Trump. I suppose what we can try to get at that indirectly by combining party ID, vote in 2016, that we have an ideology of respondents, and so by focusing on looking at moderate or independent, those who did vote for Trump, but then say they're undecided. We could try to work around that. We don't have a specific question, but it's something interesting to look into. Thank you.
Okay, and now let's move to Sam Ritzholtz from actually back in my home country.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Gabriella and Andy, for that really interesting research. My question is actually based off, we started initially with the title, where there's a comment of, is Pete gay enough? And that was a big debate that I felt, not to generalize, was happening within the Democratic Party and the left of the party. And the presentation as such really commented on, it felt like it was analyzing whether he was too gay. And so I was wondering, do you have any analysis of within the Democratic voters? Like you did gender and race, but you did it among Democrats and Republicans. But I was wondering if there's anything interesting when you just look within the Democratic Party. And I think that'd be particularly interesting because I think this cleavage that exists about whether to support a gay candidate or not, it kind of follows a party line, it seems, as we would expect in a general election matchup. But I think that conversation was actually really happening a lot within the Democratic Party. And so I don't know if this would be a future experiment of looking at a comparison between, with all these same different, I guess, constructions of Mayor Pete, that and Biden or another moderate, and whether within the Democrats themselves, will Democrats still show up, or will they be so hesitant because of LGBTIQ identity? And so I was wondering, just in general, do you guys have any of that analysis intra-party as opposed to inter-party?
Right, thank you, Sam. I'm just gonna answer, and then Andy, if you want to jump in and say more. Yeah, that's a very good point. There was a lot of discussion about Pete not being queer enough, too heteronormative. I suppose what we can do, we have an open-ended question in which we ask respondents what they like or dislike about Pete. They could write whatever they wanted. So I guess we could do text analysis of the responses that we got, focusing on Democratic voters, where they were free to tell us what they like or dislike about Pete being gay or not, and see whether the treatment influenced the response that we get when we present, for instance, as Pete as gay and religious. Is he rejected more by Democrats because of the point that you were making? So I think we could look into that. Andy, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll add a tiny bit just to earn my supper. So we did, Sam, we did look, I think we had just under 600 LGBTQ self-identifying voters, which was really useful because we actually were able to also gain some purchase on gender non-conforming, trans, non-binary voters as well. And we were really interested in this question about whether there was a penalty from the queer community in the presentation of Pete, and that he was not perhaps as authentically queer as some were asking for. What we found was that before he dropped out, he was competitive with Elizabeth Warren and with Bernie Sanders in the LGBTQ vote, but he wasn't winning it. We actually, our experiment fell with serendipity over the period when he dropped out. So we could look at what happened to the voters when he dropped out. And he immediately endorsed Biden. And we saw a massive shift of voters go to Biden, of queer voters going to Biden after he dropped out. And then Biden actually, from being nowhere in the queer vote, managed to get quite close to Warren and Sanders. And Bernie was winning comfortably. Gabe may remember the details, but if you separated it out by the G, the T, the L, and the trans and gender non-conforming communities, they were all going to different Democratic candidates. Pete did better with gay men, but he didn't do as well with lesbians or trans or bisexual people. Bernie did very well with bisexually identified pansexual voters, perhaps unsurprisingly, but also the highest proportion of conservative moderates was in the trans population that we found. So by far the highest flange of the right was in the transgender non-conforming pool, which wasn't huge, but it was, we had 30 or 40 or 50 people in that pool. And they were much more likely to be identified on the right or as a Republican or as a conservative than any of the other letters within the family. Let's move on.
Yes, and just to add that to that very quickly, Andy, since you mentioned the transgender population in our survey, support for Pete was very low among transgender respondents. They went for Bernie, even if they identified as conservative to a very large extent.
Okay, let us move to Andrew Proctor.
Hi, yeah, thank you for this presentation, really interesting results. So I want to focus on the sort of religious and proudly gay Pete treatment versus the military and proudly gay. So you touched a little bit on potentially why one was really positive and one was his lowest level of support. But I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about maybe how this tracks with how support moves among different voters, because I really would have expected the religious and proudly gay treatment to increase his support, which is not really what you found. And so I'm also curious about this in particular because you said there was a potential for inauthenticity as an explanation. But I also think that Donald Trump is really inauthentic on this issue. And I know you don't frame him as a religious person, but I'm struggling with sort of that, thinking through how Pete would be inauthentic on religion and Donald Trump wouldn't be, and whether that affects that as a possible explanation for that outcome, or whether it's perhaps that a lot of independents are not religious, therefore that treatment isn't moving the people who are potentially movable. That's one thing. And so also I think sort of if you have those open-ended questions, I think maybe that's a way to get at this. Maybe there will be something in those data. And so I would strongly encourage and support your decision to look at those since you suggested it earlier. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for your question. I'll just say a few words and then I'll let Andy talk more about the inauthenticity. Yeah, we were quite surprised as well because religious proudly gay Pete doesn't do very well. We didn't show the data, but even among religious respondents, doesn't do very well. And so I'll let Andy speak about authenticity. The other possibility, as I mentioned before, is making religion salient in the mind of voters, which is an analogous strategy to some extent to what may have happened in 2004 when bans on same-sex marriage were put on the ballot at the same time of the presidential election with the hope that they would turn up evangelicals in support of George W. Bush. So that's a possibility. I think, as you suggest, that we may look into the open-ended question to try to tease out some possible mechanism and get a better idea of why. But Andy, if you want to say something about the inauthenticity.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's very much just speculation that it would be fascinating to get feedback on as we think about these things more. But I just had this gut feeling that there could be an element of Pete's evangelical Christianity not matching the received wisdom, the conventional wisdom of what a gay candidate should be like, and it almost being psychologically jarring, and doubts about the authenticity of that religiosity creep in because it's not something that is normally packaged in our minds or our media together completely untruthfully, and this is not real. But I think I could imagine some voters just seeing that as being out of whack with their expectations about the principles and the values and the pursuits of an openly queer candidate, and then maybe some authenticity coming with that. But this is very much just, you know, thumb-sucking speculation, and we don't have any evidence as yet to say that that's what's going on. We're just trying to think, why should religious Pete do so badly? Why should not religious Pete make up for some of the negativity of gay Pete in a homophobic society? He didn't seem to really do it with the religiosity, so we're trying to explain why. Mm-hmm. Let us move on to the godfather of queer politics, Ken Sherrill.
Okay, I unmuted. Okay, let me begin with an apology. I sat here and realized that when you gave me the opportunity to look at the photos before you went into the field, I didn't make a suggestion that I should have made, which was a picture of Pete with Obama. That none of the pictures emphasize Pete as a Democrat, and the role of party identification in explaining the vote is so vast that we should have made it clear. We could have said he'd been a candidate for president of chair of the Democratic National Committee. So I should have thought of this. I apologize. Second, on the religion question, I have a different theory, which is that religiosity hurts on the left, and particularly with gay people on the left. That religiosity is associated with the religious right and with the Trump crazies, and that, you know, what putting religiosity in does is to emphasize the not gay enough among particularly the gay left, but I think it may have, you know, so I would take a look and control about that. I'd also like to see a breakdown of the votes, even though the ends will get small, among gay and straight voters. You know, we're hypothesizing, or in most of this presentation, it's that these variables had equal effects on gay and straight voters. That may not have been the case. In fact, I rather doubt that it was the case. And since you have data on sexual orientation of the voters, I think you ought to make that breakdown. I'd also suggest, this goes back to some work that Andrew and I did, that a lot of people who say that they're trans don't know the meaning of the word, and that this is particularly the case with those on the right. And I would conjecture that if you ran even a control for education among trans people who call themselves conservatives, or conservatives, more accurately, dumb conservatives who call themselves trans, yet you'll find that what you're doing is measuring ignorance rather than anything else. I have a list of comments and questions, so if anybody wants to stop me, you know, wave your hands or something. And a lot of this has to do.
So Ken, let me let's come back and take your questions as well offline. But I have a few more people on the list.
Okay.
So can we give Gabe a chance to answer those first ones? Thanks.
Yeah. So well, regarding what Ken. First of all, it's great to see you. Thank you for your comments. And we can look at into whether religion is hurting on the left and gay people on the left by going more into detail about the choice of LGBTQ respondents, looking at their ideology. So we can definitely do that. As you said, the end will become small, but we can. And yeah, we also did the analysis. We didn't show in the presentation, but what you mentioned, differences between LGBTQ voters and straight voters. Now, if I remember correctly, among straight voters, the religious proudly gay Pete does worst. Among LGBTQ voters, perhaps counterintuitively, the proud gay Pete doesn't do very well. He still wins more than 60% of the votes, but compared to other treatment, he doesn't do very well. Now, the differences, I don't think were statistically significant because the numbers get quite small, well, 100 respondents per treatment, but we can definitely look more into that. And yeah, I'd love to talk more, Ken. Maybe we can then chat another time.
Let's move to Phil Jones.
All right, hey folks, another English accent for you all today. This is a really cool project, and I had two thoughts that largely echo what other people are saying as well. So thought number one is I would love to see all of this broken down by how religious the respondent is. I think Andrew Proctor mentioned this super briefly, but that might help you see why the religious gay Pete is disliked so much. So if it's a function of respondents who are themselves religious turning on him, that seems like a very different mechanism than if it's an across the board dislike for a religious gay candidate. Excuse me, those seem like different, and maybe you could get some leverage there. And then my second thought is just, I think what we all really want to know is like, why, right? Like, so if you want to go beyond just vote choice in the dependent variable, like I'm assuming you didn't, I mean, I don't know. So did you ask, you know, perceptions of his ideology, how much people liked him as a person, whether people felt disgusted by him as a candidate? Those are all factors that you might think would vary, even if they don't affect vote choice specifically. So I think that goes to like the earlier point about people might be voting for whoever the Democrat is, no matter what, but they might still like Buttigieg less, they might think he's more liberal, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my comments.
Well, thank you, Phil. They're great comments, and I think we can do both. So we have, for the first question, we have a question about religiosity. We also have a question about which religious denomination respondents belong to. So we can also look into that. And then in terms of dependent variable, we definitely have a question asking how much they like Pete on a 10-point scale. And we did some analysis on that. The proud gay Pete doesn't do very well. So I think there is some support to perhaps what you were getting at. People may vote for Pete because he's Democrat, but still there is some movement. And then we also have some other variables, some other questions about ideology, prejudice, and electability. So we can look into these dependent variables as well. Thank you so much.
All right, next up, we actually have a real life out LGBTQ politician, Baroness Liz Barker. So Liz, would you ask your question?
Hello, greetings from SW19. Thank you very much for your very tantalizing presentation. You took the variables, the 7 different Petes, and you put them up against a neutral Donald Trump. Had you put them up against Donald Trump, evangelical Christian, twice divorced, never served in the military, do you think that that would have had an impact? And do you think that that would have got you closer to the point that Phil just made about not just understanding what people thought, but why?
Well, thank you, Baroness. Well, that's a great idea. So I wish we could go back and run the experiment again. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. But I think, yeah, it would have been great, because if we are talking about inauthenticity, that would have probably helped us disentangle this mechanism. So unfortunately, we only have one slide about Donald Trump, which is neutral slide, the same for everyone, which is also probably why we don't see much movement in terms of proportional vote for Trump by treatment. The movement happens more in proportional vote for Pete, because we are talking about Pete. But for a follow-up experiment, that would be a terrific idea, I think. Thank you.
So now next up, we have a few more minutes. We have Michael Pomotree.
Hi, thank you. This is a really interesting project and presentation. My question was about breaking it down by states, because I know you did that in terms of the sort of the aggregate percentage of support, but you could sort of have a Simpson's paradox kind of thing where you have, for instance, on the religiosity result, a negative effect of religiosity that's primarily grounded in places like California, New York, but a positive effect that are in more conservative or red states. So I guess my question is, have you thought about the sort of electoral college impact of the particular treatments? And in particular, is it more likely, because you said, Pete Buttigieg in the campaign was trying to emphasize his religiosity. Could it be perhaps that it was not sort of the aggregate vote share that he was concerned about, but rather the moving the electoral college?
Thank you, Michael. That's a great suggestion. So far, we only look at overall vote for Pete and Trump by state, not divided by treatment, where we see that Pete wins swing states, so potentially very important for the electoral college. But we can definitely look into how results vary by treatment and by state. The numbers for each treatment will not be very high in terms of observation, so I'm not sure if there will be anything statistically significant, but it's yeah, definitely possibly interesting suggestive evidence, so we're going to do that. Thank you.
Excellent. Let's take another question from Howard.
Thanks for a second chance. I'm curious about your choice of marker for the Proudly Gay Pete being his affection and public display of affection for his husband, as opposed to other markers of being proudly gay, leading a pride parade, or being visible with other well-known gay celebrities. Because I have the hypothesis that the public display of affection is the strongest trigger of some discomfort among people who are sympathetic or supportive of gay people, but not fully comfortable with their public displays of affection. And that if a different marker or a different definition of what it meant to be proudly gay were used, you might have had a different result between Gay Pete and Proudly Gay Pete. And if there's other research outside your survey about how people respond to different markers of gay identity, you know, that could tie in here also. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. So to just answer your question, that's the only proudly gay marker that we have. And I think you're right when you say that it is, for some people, the strongest trigger of discomfort. I think it's quite interesting to see how once we put also the military Pete next to the proudly gay Pete with his husband, that is powerful enough to delete the negative effect of being proudly gay. And so it's true that it's a very strong trigger, but I think our results also show that there are ways to counteract this strong trigger. And in the general sample, the proud gay Pete does worse than the baseline, but not so much worse. So hopefully this is encouraging going forward. And especially among them Democrats and even independents, we see the effect is not really strongly negative when it comes to vote choice. Thank you.
All right, let's take the final question for now before I close it up by Stuart.
Hi, so first of all, great presentation, Gabrielle, really cool. So my question basically relates to the main research question is Pete electable? And I think like an important part of the answering the question is whether people are likely to turn out on the day, right? So I wondered if you have a question, as well as these forced comparisons that you put on voters, if you ask them their propensity to vote, and if so, if this occurred post or pre-treatment, because if it's post, it's actually like another experiment you have in there of whether telling people that he's really gay or something like this affects whether they're likely to turn out and vote for their man, or if they're just likely to say, you know, we like him, but I won't head to the polls.
Thank you, Stuart. I think this is very interesting point also, general point for this like line of research. It is one thing to say that you're going to vote for someone. It's another thing to show up on election day. So we don't have a question asking that. What we have, our sample is based on likely American voters. So it's not a sample of the general population, but it's likely voters. So at least it's people who were pre-screened by saying that they were likely to go and vote on election day in November. But it would be definitely interesting to do more on that.
All right. So thank you so much, Gabe, for presenting and carrying all the heavy water today. We appreciate that. Thank you all so much for joining us. I have to say, one of the lovely things for me is that I have been reading and learning from all of you for a long time, and I don't know what people look like, and now I have somewhat of a better idea, which is quite nice. We hope this is a nice space that we can communicate and talk again. I want to thank Nicole, who provided the closed captioning for today, which is very important important for us to make this as accessible as possible. This was recorded, so we will post the link and you share this as widely as you want to share it with anybody, your students and other interested parties. I should tell you that next week we have the wonderful Andrew Flores, who is presenting on the criminal victimization of LGBTQ people in America, presenting a co-authored paper with a number of his colleagues formerly at the Williams Institute. So next week, Andrew Flores. Feel free to pass this link and registration link around to all your friends and colleagues, and we will try and build this into a continuing, vibrant community where we can learn from each other and support each other. So thank you so much for being here today, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.